This is Professor Damon Fordham for History 111, and we're coming down into the home stretch here. And this morning we're going to take the focus off of Rome and all that and go into the Far East and talk about the Qin and Han Dynasties of ancient China. Now, the Qin dynasty was this violent time where a few good things were happening, such as the standardizing of the weights and the system of writing characters, currency, and the building of the Great Wall. Now, the Qin Emperor at this time period was a fellow around the about the 300 or so AD by the name of Qin Shi Huang. That's Qinshhuang. And he did something that the current president is pretty fond of doing. He built the wall. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. But anyway, this was the original one, but there's a current Great Wall that was from the Ming Dynasty of the 1300s AD. So let me clarify that right now. But in either case, though, when Qin Shi Huang built the original Great Wall of China, it is said that over 1 million died in the making of that wall. So Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BC, and his natural causes while looking for a magic elixir that would give him eternal life. Seriously, folks. So the prime ministers then sought out his weakest son, who was Qin Shi, who was 19 years old at the time. And the idea of this was so that they could make him, the prime ministers could use him as a puppet ruler to carry out their wishes. But didn't turn out that way. You see, he was a really rotten emperor because he also had his prime ministers executed, arrested, and whenever a messenger, for example, came in with really bad news for him, he had the messenger executed. Whoa. So he raised taxes for frivolous purposes such as pageants and parades and large houses and things of this sort. So the people had it and they revolted. So all over the place you had people who declared themselves kings, and these warlords were taking over all over the place. And that was the end of the Qin dynasty. So then, this was followed by a fellow by the name of Emperor Wu. Now, you might remember Emperor Wu was the guy who had Sima Khan castrated in a lecture earlier in this class. Well, this is the same Emperor Wu, as a matter of fact, okay? So he ruled from about 140 to 87 BC, and he was a peasant who led the rebellion against the Qin dynasty that forced Qin Shi to quit a whole lot earlier. Now, he was not fond of reading, ironically, but after a while, he encountered a scholar by the name of Lu Jie, who taught him the teachings of Confucius, and Emperor Wu liked what he heard. So he used Confucius thought to rule the land, and he had Confucianism taught at a school he founded called the Imperial University, founded in 36 BC, one of the longest schools in the world, which is kind of ironic for a guy who initially didn't like to read. They also studied science and mathematics. So anyway, in the midst of this, however, this Emperor Wu, however, was a pretty good emperor, aside from the story regarding Sima Khan and so forth. But he died in a very interesting way, though. You see, he entered his hometown near the end of his life, and during one campaign where he's conquering land and so forth, he wrote these words: "Song of the great wind, a great wind come forth. The clouds rose on high. Now that my might ruled the seas, I have returned to my old village, where I will find brave men to guard the four corners of my land." Pretty deep guy, huh? But get this, he was wounded by an arrow during one of these military campaigns. But guess what? To show you what selfless people they were in this particular tradition of Chinese history, he felt that it was his destiny to die in such a fashion. So he denied medical treatment, and thus that was the end of his life. Now, in the course of all of this, he made military conquests from Central Asia to Korea and Vietnam. And to this day, after some 2,000 years, there's still tension between China and Vietnam. Go figure, right? You think we have some long-standing grudges here in America? Whoa, you start studying world history, you're going to see some long grudges. So anyway, another one of his accomplishments was helping to establish the Silk Road during the days of Alexander the Great. And that was a major commodity in China because they traded silk, and Emperor sent his emissary to trade with under what was left of Alexander the Great's army. And the results pleased them, with trade and rules were delegated as these soldiers returned to Greece. So it was a great economic as well as cultural advancement, because this meant that a lot of these ancient kingdoms borrowed from each other through their exposure to each other. And this is very rare back in those days, because back then the average person never went more than 20 miles from their hometown. So it's a great advancement in world history here. So along with this, modern paper was invented during this period, but it was originally used to wrap fish. Like I said, go figure. But essentially, though, they began to use it to compose things in a way that was very economic, because prior to that you had to carve things by and large or use parchment. But this made reading available to people who were not of means, so of course this helped to spread education. But after Wu died, hard times came. There was a fellow by the name of Wang Mang who ruled from about 45 BC to 6 AD. And he came along after a period of political intrigues and instability around 9 AD. Now, in the midst of all this confusion, the first Chinese census was taken in 2 AD, ironically around the same time that Augustus Caesar, during the Roman times, he had that census done where Mary and Joseph had to go back to Bethlehem, and well, we know how that one turned out. But anyway, in the midst of all of this, though, they found that China had over 57 million people around the time of the birth of Christ. Today, they're well over 1 billion. Something to think about, right? So anyway, Wang Mang was the nephew of an empress, and he was named a commander of the armed forces at age 37. He was very effective. He was known for his strong discipline and Confucian belief, and he only hired capable individuals as opposed to those with family ties. So this is the beginning of the meritocracy, whereas you're no longer hired just because you happen to be related to somebody or because you've gained favor. You had to be good at what you did in order to be under the rule of Emperor Wu. Wang Mang. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, Wang Mang was a very honest man, and he was loved. And let me tell you how honest he was. He had this lazy, shiftless, worthless, trifling son who killed one of his servants. "My son, what is the matter with you?" "Yo, Paps, what's the haps with that? You know, I killed his servant, so big deal. We got plenty of other servants. What's wrong with that?" "I cannot believe I have raised such a disrespectful and trifling son." "Well, so what you gonna do about it? I'm your son, right? You're not gonna kill me, right?" Are you Dad?" "Dad, what are you doing with that knife?" "Dad, hey, yo, Paps, I was just kidding. My son, you have proven yourself to be worthless. Therefore, I demand that you use this knife and commit suicide." "And what if I don't?" "Well, either you do it or I will." So much for the son. So the people respected him for being such an upright and uncorrupt type man. However, this is where he messed up. It began to go to his head, and he developed a personality cult in which he posted false mythologies that presented him as the kind of second coming of the great empire's leaders. So he began to have all opposition killed. And so in spite of his redistribution of the land and abolishing slavery in China and establishing an income tax, he monopolized the salt and liquor industries and forestry and fishing and so forth. But this enraged the peasants. So therefore, things got kind of messed up after that, as far as with Wang Mang went. And then the worst of all, the Yellow River flooded around very late in his career, around 23 CE. And so then finally he was overthrown. And so the Han Dynasty went into pretty hard times. And you began to have these movements come about, such as what was known as in the later Han Dynasty, you had the Yellow Turbans, a religious group who saw the end times coming and so forth. And they wore yellow scarves around their heads. That's what they call the Yellow Turbans. And they demanded fair treatment by the Han state and equal distribution of farmlands. And things got worse and famine continued. And so thus, this led to eventually the downfall of the Han Empire. So that's basically the story of the Qin and the Han Empires. On the page, I will have the page numbers to which you can read up on these things, as well as the study guide for your final exam. Have a great day, folks.